I think having a healthy Rashad Bateman went a long way. Only A.J. Brown, Mike Williams, and George Kittle have cracked 1,000 yards on fewer targets. There's TreVeyon out wide running a freaking sluggo double move and, taking the top off the defense for 40. Now throughout August, we can't go a day without hearing about TreVeyon catching another wheel route.
You can forget your boring 5 numbers draft strategy. Seriously, throw it out, because that is not what this show is about. We're counting down the players who are the most fun to watch in fantasy football and the most fun to roster. Because at the heart of all this, fantasy football, it's supposed to be fun. Yes, we want to win a load of money, but that's why I brought Ian Hartitz on, because we're going to combine league-winning rosters with the most fun players in fantasy. Ian, at this point in the summer, are you still able to latch on to the concept of fun, or is it being ground out of you by everybody reporting how many, the completion rate of Justin Fields in training camp?
Bro, it's pretty hard this time of year. I go out there and I'm like, hey guys, I don't know, Keon Coleman going outside the top 120 picks. And then it's just like you start battling and it's like, oh, I forgot how many people are going around 11 just have a picture perfect profile in our shirt things as it is. So yeah, was saying before the show, again, this is the time of the offseason where I'm just very, very ready to get into week one. Because remember, man, as much as everything makes sense in August, we are not too far away from remembering that we are covering a sport that is basically 60 minutes of consecutive car crashes using a ball that is not even round. So yes, I would like to have some fun, and I believe we have a nice show today to do that.
Yeah, definitely. So myself and Ian, we put together a list of almost 30 different players. We were duplicating a few of them because, fun players. They seem to be a good topic.
Great
and then
minds.
we put it to the Fantasy Sanctuary Discord, which you can become a member of by hitting the join button down below. And they narrowed it down. I think we had a really good amount of people who voted and cast it and got it down to 10 players. And we're going to start with number 10, Chase Brown. From week 9 onwards, averaged 23.6 touches per game. Also averaged 20.6 fantasy points per game, which sounds fun to me, Ian. Now, the Bengals, they didn't do too much this offseason, but I know that Chase Brown's quite a divisive figure. So where are you at on Chase Brown heading into 2025?
It's one of those things, man, where I was a little hesitant earlier in the offseason just because as great as week 9 onwards was, it was pretty clear that the Zach Moss injury was what led to this featured role. So his snaps were starting to tick up and everything. I'm not saying he wasn't poised to have a nice second half of the season, but this dude literally outside of Christian McCaffrey and Kyron Williams was getting the most fantasy-friendly role in basically all of the NFL. So yeah, man, at this point in time, obviously Zach Moss wasn't going to be someone to hold back Chase Brown from being, a high round draft pick in the first place, but he's completely out of the picture. Samaje Perine and Taj Brooks, based on what we're seeing in the preseason, not going to be annoyances as well. So Chase Brown for me right there in that round 2 mix with guys like Jonathan Taylor, Bucky Irving, Josh Jacobs. And honestly, he's a big reason why I've been loving, man, picking from that 101, 102 spot, because you're getting out of Jamar Chase and Bijan Robinson. And then by the time that round 2, round 3 turn comes around, a lot of times you do have a chance of getting a Chase Brown or a Bucky or one of these top 12 wide receivers, Ladd, London, AJB, still hanging around. And man, worst case scenario, your league's sharp. They've taken all the great running backs and wide receivers. Okay, then we can move our attention to Brock Bowers or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. So again, love that early spot, because I think after these top 12 RBs and wide receivers, we do see a bit more of a tier break.
Yeah. One thing I've kind of gone back and forth a little bit in my rankings is try to decide the gap between Bucky Irving and Chase Brown, because they both came on massively down the stretch. We know that, there's possibly a little bit more in the receiving game that we could see from both of them. They're both explosive players, but Chase Brown feels like a little bit more of a lock for potentially a higher opportunity share within that backfield. But it doesn't seem like a question for a lot of people. A lot of people seem to think that Bucky Irving is just a clear tier above Chase Brown. Is that the same for you, or do you have them kind of tighter in your rankings?
No, I got them right next to each other, man. Honestly, I think look, Bucky was amazing last year. I get it. But some of these stats that we use to try to quantify who's good and bad at running back, man, they aren't the stickiest things year over year. Again, watching Bucky is fantastic. And that's always kind of been the joke about, who's going to be Liam Cohen's Bucky Irving? It's like, all right, who's going to be the running back who's good enough to break 3 tackles or run and reverse across field, man? We can't give Cohen credit for everything out here. So, look, I'll again concede that Bucky 1 for 1. If we're picking teams on the playground, I'll take Bucky as my running back over Chase Brown. But That said, man, if the volume I think is probably leaning slightly in Chase's direction, Bucky could have a nice role too. And the offense, especially, bro. Like I'll take the Bengals over the Buccaneers 8 days of the week
Oh,
going into
yes.
this year. With all due respect, Tampa Bay, man. It's close, man. Honestly, I think 1-for-1, I probably lean towards Chase.
Yeah, and that's where I've kind of been leaning slightly. I haven't flipped them yet, but yeah, the Bengals defense is so bad, it's really going to make a big difference to how many points they have to put up. Meanwhile, Tampa, they just keep getting injured at wide receiver, and that's going to make it harder for the offense to be perhaps as high end as we hope. Let's move on. Before we do vote, if it's your first time finding us here at Fantasy Sanctuary, smash that subscribe button. We got loads of great shows over the next couple of weeks. You can go and check out this video with Matthew Berry, Ian's boss, who absolutely brought the fire talking about some players just this week. Next week, we've got late round QB and a bunch of other great guests. It's going to be a good season. Player number 9 in the countdown, Xavier Worthy, the fastest player in the NFL, 4.2 140-yard dash. And last year, it felt like people were much more excited about Xavier Worthy. Went out there and he saw 17 passes of 20-plus yards downfield, and he only caught 3, which is perhaps why he's ranked number 9 in the top 10 most fun players rather than higher. He had a 41% catchable target rate, which ranked 61st among wide receivers with 10 targets of 20-plus yards. So obviously it didn't quite work out. But Patrick Mahomes has been going on all offseason about how much of an emphasis he wants to put on improving the deep game. Do you think that they can do that? Or is Matt Nagy absolutely just going to keep the shackles on Patrick Mahomes once again?
I have no clue the involvement that Nagy has in the game plan, the play calling on a week-to-week basis, but it is wild that the second he came back to Kansas City, we've seen Mahomes go from being the most productive fantasy quarterback ever to now being like this borderline QB1. So I would like to see the deep ball get back there. It sounds like, just based on what we've heard from practice, that they've been doing a better job. That said, this time last year, a lot of the same sentiment out of the guys, but it is wild with Worthy. And honestly, Dalton Kincaid's another guy where, yeah, you said it, man, the uncatchable rates just weren't there. And again, you never really want to blame Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen for anything. And I'm not saying that the uncatchable rates are, this exact, this gospel we have to go by. Obviously, Worthy on some of those deep balls, was having trouble knowing where the sideline was in his own right. So, but again, man, like we saw him, and you got the stats up there right now, 15.6 PPR points per game from week 11 on. He was doing that without the deep ball, man. And it sure sounds like Rashee Rice is going to be missing 4 to 6 games at some point. Even once he's back, I do think Worthy and what they were able to do with his effectiveness, even a little bit in the run game, or at least those, design kind of swing passes that turn into rush attempts. I mean, there is a chance that Worthy just still gets a decent percentage of those sorts of touches, especially with Travis Kelce not exactly being a youngin' these days. And God forbid they hit 3 or 4 more of those deep balls, man. All of a sudden, we're looking at a wide receiver 2, a wide receiver 1 upside. So I'm with you, man. Honestly, Dwayne McFarland and myself have been doing some of these high stakes drafts over at Real Time Sports, and I'm continuously shocked to see Worthy being the guy that falls back to us, man. Because we've had discussions, round 5, round 6, and we're like, all right, Pickens, Jameson, Tedero, McMillan, or Xavier Worthy. Like he is in that conversation, and it's happened twice now where we've decided to go with another guy, and then Worthy's come all the way back around. So fun player who I think deserves to be right in that, low end wide receiver 2 conversation that, especially in your home leagues, I think you can get a little bit later than even you expect.
Yeah, so I mean, on the Fantasy Life Consensus ADP, I was looking before, he's at pick 40 on Underdog, but then you look across the board and you're talking much closer to 60 in a lot of them. So if you're able to get him as your wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, I think that's an absolute ideal situation, and definitely one I want to get into. And it's worth mentioning that Hollywood Brown, again, is unhealthy for an entire offseason. Like that isn't going to hold Xavier Worthy back. So we're looking at just Travis Kelce taking targets and falling over straight away. I'm very much high on Xavier Worthy for all formats this year. Player number 8 in the countdown, George Kittle. Now, I thought George Kittle could have been ranked slightly higher in this for a guy who led the league in yards per target, yards per game, yards per route run, and yards per reception among tight ends. He also ranked 2nd in yards after catch per reception and touchdowns. So seems pretty fun to me. Obviously, we removed Debo and Ayuk. Ricky Pearsall's missed part of training camp. Juwan Jennings missed part of training camp and wants a new contract. And I just think even if Kittle takes a step back in efficiency, he's probably going to make up for it in volume, though, right, Ian?
Yeah, and man, the thing I keep going back to, like, just imagine the last 5 years, all right? If we were sitting there in week 8, it's like Debo Samuel's out, Brandon Ayuk's out. My God, we'd be ranking Kittle as tight end 1 and just losing our minds. Every single podcast will be starting with how great of a position George Kittle is in. That's what we're looking at now for at least the first 2 months of the season. And honestly, I don't even think that Brandon Ayuk coming back is going to be that big of an issue for Kittle. Kittle and Debo were the overlaps. Those are the two guys underneath, intermediate.
Yeah.
You want to get them those yak-friendly touches. And I understand that having a healthy version of CMC is going to eat into that as well. But yeah, man, I mean, what Kittle's been able to do, I mean, what was like 1,100 yards on 90 targets, whatever it was last year. I mean, his receiving numbers are obviously incredible for tight ends, but you do these yards and targets per route run and include Kittle with the wide receivers, and you're going to see him up in the upper right-hand corner of these graphs, man, with the very best. So one of my most drafted dudes on Underdog, I think he's my 4th most drafted tight end, which it's pretty hard when you got to get the guy again in round 4. So been going out of my way for him. Anytime he is there in round 4, man, I do think he is the early round tight end to go ahead and try to get your hands on. Because again, if I've learned anything from actually getting my feet, really wet in these redraft streets recently over the last few weeks, it's I want as many bullets as possible for these wide receivers in that round 5 through 9 range. So again, we got our top 12 guys I feel good about, but once you get past Lab McConkey, maybe T. Higgins, we got a bunch of olds, we got Ohio State ballers or quarterback questions, and we got some running backs. So yeah, Hampton, TreVeyon and stuff I feel good about, but man, Breece Hall, like James Conner, DeAndre Swift went round 3 in a draft I was in it yesterday, man. Could not be me there. So I know, crazy. So different providers, different, strokes for different folks. I get it and everything. But man, when I am facing these like just running back and wide receiver rooms in rounds 3 and 4, why not just take the freaking stud tight end or quarterback? And in this case, Kittle in round 4, man, sign me up.
Yeah, and Kittle feels like the perfect hedge against Christian McCaffrey as well. Like if you're not in on Christian McCaffrey, we don't need to re-Travis. Like he's played more than 11 games, once in the last 4 years, I think. It's been pretty bleak. But when he's out there, he's a league winner. But if you don't believe in him, then Kittle should absolutely be the player that you look to hedge and take advantage of. Do you feel like this year sets up better with ADP, how it is, to bet on an elite tight end than an elite quarterback?
It's a good question. I think Kittle is the one where I'm willing to go to. Overall, I would say more so the elite quarterbacks. I mean, again, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, early round 3. Jalen Hurts in round 4 is just as good of a value, I think, at that point as George Kittle. So honestly, though, I have the same kind of mindset with all of them. I've even had some 1-1, 1-1 builds, one of each position first 4 rounds that I haven't hated by any stretch. So I will say in both instances, man, first or last kind of barbell mindset, where if I am going to be using an early round pick on the position, it's going to be on one of the big 4 QBs or one of the big 3 tight ends. I haven't been messing around with the Sam Laportas, the TJ Hawkinsons of the world, because while I don't disagree with them being like ranked where they are, tight end 4, tight end 5, yeah, sure, but going 30, 40 plus picks ahead of the David Njokus, the Tyler Warrens, and those sorts of guys, like give me those lower end tight end ones at a point where I don't love the running backs and wide receivers the same way.
Yeah, well, we've mentioned a couple of players that we are going to cover. So let's move on and talk about player number 7. Now, look, obviously Lamar Jackson had to make the top 10 most fun players in the NFL, and for fantasy purposes, if you ask me as an incredibly biased Ravens fan, he is the most fun player. Yeah. But I can't get over the fact that we're coming off possibly one of the best quarterback seasons ever, like one of the first quarterbacks to throw 40 passing touchdowns and 4 or fewer interceptions. He had 40 passing touchdowns and 600 rushing yards, like had career highs in passing yards, touchdowns. It was an insane season. Now, obviously, the Ravens defense is probably going to be a bit better this year than last year. So maybe they don't end up in a shootout. But we've seen these years from Lamar where the offense just goes kind of really efficient at times. And since Todd Monken took over as well, it's just been like, Lamar was going up and then all of a sudden it's just been straight vertical and incredible. Is he your QB1 or can you find it's just too difficult to split him and Josh Allen?
I have Josh ahead of him purely because of the goal line stuff, man. Like no other reason.
Such a big advantage.
Right, because I mean, we talk about the dual threat QBs, and obviously Lamar, Jayden Daniels, Kyler Murray. I mean, yes, like they have a huge advantage over the pocket passers, but Allen and Hurts are just in a different stratosphere with what they
Yeah.
get at the goal line. I actually looked it up, man. Over these past 2 years, quarterback fantasy points on rush attempts from inside the 5 yard line, which let's face it, 90% of the time are these tush push 1 yard QB sneaks. But man, again, last 2 years, Jalen Hurts has 147 fantasy points inside the 5 yard line on rushes. Josh Allen has 93. Lamar Jackson has 6.
Yeah.
Jake Browning has 3 times as many fantasy points inside the 5 yard line as Lamar Jackson. They just don't use him inside the 5. And I get it. You got Derrick Henry. Like, there's no need to be using the guy. We had Gus the Bus Edwards before, doing his thing there. So Ravens, it's working. Todd Monken in the system. I think having a healthy Rashad Bateman went a long way last year, man. Just again, what he's able to do deep downfield. He's a guy where, good luck ignoring him. He ended up catching like the 5th most touchdowns in the league if you include the playoffs. Zay Flowers, someone who, again, I just love. Like, get that dude on the Olympic flag football team. My goodness, man. I know wide receivers in Baltimore haven't been putting up the biggest numbers because there's so many mouths to feed, but it's just one of those things, man, where as much as we can say, oh, look how great Lamar was last year, like regression. I mean, that's just a fancy word people love to throw around and say, like, this guy was incredible last year. So, like, just he's probably not going to be as incredible again because it's hard to be that good in the first place. So, again, Lamar, Josh, I have Josh ahead, man, but I'll tell you what, when I'm on the clock and again, those top 12 running backs, the top 12 wide receivers are off the board. If someone takes Josh and I got to settle for Lamar, air quotes, settle, like, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and that's definitely what kind of makes him fun. The Discord, when I put it to a vote of the players that we'd suggested, they assumed that I'd nominated both Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers, whereas you'd actually nominated both them, and I'd just nominated Zay Flowers. Neither of the wide receivers made it onto the list, but I think it's kind of fair to say that Lamar has everything he needs to have another incredible season. Now, you could, if you want to make the argument that Derrick Henry absorbs too much of the touchdowns, I'd say, well, what about last year? Lamar had 13 top 12 fantasy finishes last year. And now you've added DeAndre Hopkins, who is probably one of the better wide receiver threes in this league. He's definitely the best wide receiver three that the Ravens have ever had. Like, there have been some bleak situations over the years. And even if Mark Andrews has a step back, like a friend of the channel, Josh Norris, pointed out that Mark Andrews had 11 touchdowns on 15 end zone targets last year, which just isn't sustainable. But even if Andrews has a step back, I just have to have faith that Lamar isn't going to finish any worse than QB3 unless he's injured. And that's why they don't run him around the goal line, because they've got scared off by that stuff. So, yeah, Lamar set for another great season.
Also, real quick, last thing on these early round quarterbacks, I actually ran the numbers. So I want to see how often they do bust. And I believe the only 3, and look, if you draft Lamar and he finishes QB 11, I get it. That's not good. You're not going to be happy about that return. But the only 3 in the last 5 years that were top 50 overall ADP who didn't even return QB1 numbers, it was Stroud last year, Burrow the year before, and then Herbert a couple years before that. It's guys who don't run. Again, so as much as we would love to have a few more touchdowns, which are on the table for Lamar Jackson on the ground as well. He only had 4 last year. Man, it's just so rare to see these dual threat aliens come anywhere close to being a quote unquote bust. So Lamar, man, it's just, isn't it great? This is what it's about, right? We turn on Red Zone, you see a Ravens game and Lamar Jackson is your quarterback. Like, you can't replace that feeling, man.
No, it's like you go to YouTube and, like, Ian, I know you're a man who likes to cut a lot of film up, but it's like you find certain players when you're looking for plays to put into videos or on Twitter to kind of help emphasize a point or an argument you want to make. And Lamar, it's just so easy to get down the wormhole and get lost. And before you know it, you're all the way back at like his 2019 MVP, where he's just like taking souls and stuff with spin moves. Like, yeah, it's a great time to be alive. Coming in at number 6, a guy ranked ahead of Lamar Jackson, Tyler Warren, the rookie. Like, the Colts, they definitely seemed to want to play fast last year. They seemed to rein it back in as the season went on, and they couldn't trust Anthony Richardson. And then they didn't push Joe Flacco quite in the same way. But I think that this is going to be a faster-paced offense this year. And then we know that Daniel Jones is going to be the quarterback seemingly for the entire season. And while that isn't the most desirable outcome, while we would like a good quarterback there, it seems that it's working enough that Tyler Warren's been able to absolutely light up training camp and impress all these Colts beat reporters, some of whom have been around the Colts for a long time. Now, Are you in on the rookie tight ends in general? Or is that something that you tend to avoid?
I think if you are going to get one, I mean Warren, and to a slightly lesser extent Loveland. I mean, obviously it's tough to be complaining, man, at their home league prices, especially going right around in that range with Tucker Kraft or so around pick 100. Again, as much as I start turning my attention to those elite quarterbacks and kind of tight ends after the top 12 running backs and wide receivers, I start going back to those positions after we get maybe the top 35, 36 running backs and the top 50 wide receivers off the board, which again starts to come out around pick 100, which is where Warren is going. So situation where again it feels so weird, and just to look at ourselves in the mirror and be like, oh, Daniel Jones, this is good. Like, this is good for us. Like that again, I can't get over the fact that we are saying this. What Daniel Jones' PR team, man. People act like this dude is Alex Smith, and we're throwing like consistency around with the word, Daniel Jones. Like, give me a break here. But let's face it, in Tyler Warren's case, honestly, yeah, like the RPO, the low ADOT stuff, Shane Steichen's system, I can see how that is going to work. Similar sentiment with Josh Downs and everything. But the fact Richardson isn't in there, I think we can see Warren tapped into a little bit more as that wildcat quarterback that he was at Penn State, man. Put the fear of God into me and the Ohio State Buckeyes, when they were playing in Happy Valley this last year, dude. He had a sick, like 25-yard run down inside the 5-yard line. They just didn't give him the ball again. So thank you, as always, big game, James Franklin, for everything you do over there at Penn State. But again, Warren, just a complete yak beast. The fact, I love that story still where he wears 44 because his dad wanted him to run like John Riggins. So just got the hair flowing out there too. Like, it's just such a fun guy to be willing to root for out here. So again, just based on that price point and looking at the offense and everything they want to do, man, I don't know if we're going to, I don't want to assume we're getting a third straight, Laporta, Bowers, another incredible rookie tight end, but especially at this, low end tight end one cost, man, I'm more than fine with that for Mr. Warren.
Yeah, I deep dived into rookie tight end production this offseason and was kind of looking back at, and basically between 2000 and 2022, there were 169 rookie tight ends who saw at least 10 targets in their rookie season, and only 11 of them finished as top 12 tight ends in total PPR points. Now, since we've kind of had Kyle Pitts, everybody forgets it started with Kyle Pitts in his rookie year. It's been that kind of gradual improvement, and it's possibly a little early to say whether this is a trend of just tight ends being more ready to play in the NFL when they come out, where the passing league is suiting them in a different way. But when you get guys with elite draft capital, and Tyler Warren, Colson Loveland definitely had that. I think this is the first year in like 30 years, 40 years or so that two tight ends have been taken inside the first 15 picks. Like, I'm willing to bet on that, and Tyler Warren easily could have gone higher in this draft. So I find myself sometimes leaning towards Colston Loveland, and part of that is because he's cheaper, and part of it is because the quarterback situation. I have to believe that Caleb Williams is probably better than Daniel Jones, but I very much hope that this Colts team can be a fun one this year, and if they are, I'm sure Tyler Warren will be one of the most fun aspects of it.
Hey, do you think there could be a thing? Because I know Baltimore has been dealing with Mark Andrews, and even Green Bay with Tucker Kraft. Like, Warren could be the same guy in Indianapolis where they start using these tight ends as their tush-push quarterbacks. Because that would we see what Taysom Hill does. I know he's used as like more of a, again, just alpha jackhammer, kind of wildcat guy. He's not getting the tush pushes, but man, could you imagine if Andrews, Kraft, Warren, if one of these guys all of a sudden is getting like 5 or 6 rushing touchdowns per year? Like, now we're talking, man.
And that's it. And people sometimes don't realize how few touchdowns it takes at tight end to be seriously relevant. Like the year that Sam Laporta was just an absolute dog in his rookie season, he had 9. Nobody else had over 6, I don't think, in the fantasy season. Last year, Tucker Kraft scored the 3rd most touchdowns at 7. Now, if you're saying you've got a tight end who they give the goal line work to, and he gets, let's be reasonably conservative and say 4 on top of 3 receiving touchdowns, that's going to make a massive difference. And let's look at the quarterbacks that they've got there in Indy. You've got Anthony Richardson, who has constantly been injured despite being built like an absolute giant. And then you've got Daniel Jones, who's like sustained neck injuries just getting out of bed. So I really believe that keeping those guys clean and letting somebody like Tyler Warren, the young rookie who seemingly has a bit of fire to him, would be an absolutely great idea. So if that happens, or if we get any inkling of that over the next couple of weeks, it's only going to push Tyler Warren higher in my rankings. Look, we are 25 minutes into this video, and I know that a good percentage of you people watching at this point in the video are not subscribed. hit that subscribe button right now. We're going to do Dynasty, Redraft, Best Ball, DFS, all year round content. Tyler, Rich,
Do it.
both killing it. And as Ian says, do it. Number 5, Jameson Williams. And again, I could have understood an argument to push this guy higher. I think that people still see him as a bit of a boom or bust player. And even the booms haven't been super high. Like, I think he's only had 3 games in his career where he's been over 100 yards. He had 0 games with 6 or more receptions in 2024. So the booms haven't been incredible, but there's just something about Jameson Williams that is just absolutely electric. And the Lions' new offensive coordinator, we had Phil Greminger on the channel last week from Fantasy Points, and he pointed out that the offensive coordinator for the Lions now is a former speed merchant himself. He was the fastest wide receiver at the combine the year that he went to the combine. And Phil's point was, don't you think that that's just going to gravitate towards trying to scheme things up for JMO? And I was like, that is probably one of the most fun arguments I've heard for Jameson Williams in 2025. What else about Jameson is it that gets you going, Ian?
I mean, it's as Eleanor Roosevelt once said, man, America's all about speed, hot, nasty, badass speed. And that's what we got here with JMO, man. Still just 24 years old. The Ohio State Bama product, obviously, earned that high end first round draft capital for a reason. And it's a situation going to last year where I know a lot of people had that mindset of like, oh my gosh, like fool me once, fool me twice. Why is this year going to be any different? But if there's ever a guy we could paint some reasonable excuses for the first 2 years, it was always JMO. Coming off that, obviously, unfortunate ACL injury in the national championship. And the next year he has, an early season hamstring and then another suspension to deal with. So honestly, last year was our first chance that we actually got to see this guy with a clean slate and a clean bill of health. And my God, man, for the fact that he was able to put up the numbers he did on literally only 91 targets, man. Like, again, only AJ Brown, Mike Williams, and George Kittle have cracked 1,000 yards on fewer targets than what we saw JMO do last year since they started tracking the metric in 1992. So look, you got the stat up there, 0 games with 6 or more receptions. I get it. He is a little boomer busty, but again, new OC, who's to say that we're not going to see 110, 115 targets and just have things shrink a little bit more from our one true sun gods. So again, they like to use them, at least Ben Johnson like to use them in the run game as well. So you can hopefully get a few extra touches from that facet. But man, I just think JMO is freaking good, man. And again, it's one of these situations where round 5, round 6, I know in the higher stakes leagues, we got to pay up a little bit more, but home leagues, man, we can get guys like Jameson and George Pickens, the Calvin Ridleys, the Travis Hunters of the world. Every time I point this out, people in my mentions are like, well, you should do auctions. And they're right, man. Auctions are fantastic. And that's what I want to do is just load up on all these mid-round receivers.
Yeah, it's one where it seems like some people are kind of finding it that you've got to be JMO or Amon-Ra. They don't seem to see a world where both can coexist to a good level. And personally, I'm quite high on Sam Laporta. I think that he's going to be primed for a bounce back if he can stay healthy through training camp. But like Amon-Ra
He's back at practice, luckily. I saw that.
Yeah. And like Amon-Ra has proved that even if he's not getting the receptions, he seems to find his way into the end zone. Every year he's played in the league, he's increased how many touchdowns he's got. And if there's one thing I know about extrapolation in the fantasy community, you can do with it what you like. So do you worry that a JMO breakout would come at the expense of Amon-Ra, or do you think that all 3 of them really can exist to a decent level?
I think it'd be tough for a JMO breakout to come and Amon-Ra still to put up top 5 numbers like he has been over the last 2 years. But, we have seen over the past 10 years, on average, 5 teams per season produce multiple top 24 wide receivers and PPR points per game. So honestly, with the ADP right now, the Lions are one of those squads expecting to do so. I think it's reasonable, man. They play complementary different roles as much as, the Isaac Tesla hype is going out of control. I still think this passing game is going to be fairly condensed around those two. Laporta is a little bit of the wild card, so we'll see what goes on there. But again, situation where it's just a really good offense, man. I don't think they're going to be, even if the Ben Johnson factor hurts things a little bit here, I don't see the Lions going from being arguably the best offense in the league to outside the top 16 or anything like that. So again, where Jameson goes, I think just kind of alongside the fellow wide receiver twos, Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle, I prefer him to those guys. And again, I think it is thanks in large part to just being a superior overall offensive environment.
Yeah, and on ESPN in particular, he's going at pick 78, which is about 15 picks later than on a lot of platforms. Like, give me that all day. But we got 4 more players to get to. Make sure you stick around because player number 1 is spicy. Jayden Daniels, though, one of only 3 quarterbacks to average above 50 rushing yards per game, as pointed out by Matthew Berry in his 100 Facts column this week. Now, obviously, the other 2 quarterbacks, Justin Fields and Lamar Jackson, have played few more games than Jayden Daniels, but look, I've got to take a bit of an L on Jayden Daniels. I thought that he would get banged up last year. You watched the way that he was absolutely sandwiched and flattened in college, and it looked really bad. And the Commanders' offensive line last year looked bad on paper. And then Cliff Kingsbury just gets so much more out of them as an offense. Jayden Daniels was efficient. Only Lamar had more than Daniels' top 12 weekly finishes. And now they've added Deebo Samuel to the mix. Like, how high is it? Like, what are your reasonable expectations for Jayden Daniels? Maybe we should start there.
Please get Terry back and sign, but it sounds like, courtesy of the People's Insider, Ricky the dog, that a contract extension is imminent here. So shout out Ricky, man. I do appreciate that guy going above and beyond early. He's going to miss it, but guess what? He actually tries to tell us what's happening, unlike most of these alleged insiders who wait 5 seconds before the team accounts are going to tweet it out anyway. So you mentioned the Deebo Samuel edition. I kind of wish we could have done a little bit more here. Overall, again, not saying Deebo is washed or anything. He honestly looked pretty damn good with his one touch he got the other night. Just, maybe shedding a few LBs over the course of the offseason helped his cause. But again, it's a situation with Daniels where he does obviously have that rushing floor, which just doesn't bust in fantasy, man. We've had since 2014, I think 31 quarterbacks with 100 plus carries. 28 of them have been top 12 in fantasy points per game. And honestly, rookie year Lamar, he should have been. He was just kind of skewed because he was coming in for Flacco a little bit earlier on in the year. So more or less, 29 of 31 guys. Only exceptions were Kaepernick in 2020, Cam Newton. So, man, it's a situation where Daniels, that's our floor. Like a worst case scenario for Jayden Daniels this year is him finishing like QB 10, 11. I don't even know how that really happens with how good this dude can be as a passer. So I'm with you where I was a little bit skeptical last year that he would be able to just maintain his body and everything because of the cartoonish, Johnny Knoxville sort of hits that he was taking out there at LSU. But the thing that really surprised me, and we saw it as early as that Bengals game, that was when I was like, whoa, was just his ability to kind of be more of a playmaker out of structure. Because again, amazing arm. You saw him drop those deep balls to Neighbors and BTJ all the time, but he had, I think it was like something where 50% plus, it was one of the highest rates in college football, of his pressured dropbacks didn't result in an eventual pass. He either scrambled or he took a sack. Like he just wasn't really, it was weird because like he has all the tools to be this off-script playmaker. Maybe it's the VR headset, whatever it was, man, but it just seemed like he came to the NFL and just became an even better player. So, I have Jalen Hurts one spot ahead of him, but man, I honestly have all 4 of these quarterbacks at the top. I don't think they're like one after another, but they're all within kind of 8 picks. So I believe it is over on ESPN as well. Again, Fantasy Life ADP tool is pretty good for kind of checking these, but on one of these sites, he is creeping towards the end of round 3, early parts of round 4. Very, very much fine with that cost, man.
Yeah, definitely. Even on Underdog, like he's at pick 37 now, so you're just starting to creep to get him into there. I think he's probably being held up by people stacking Terry with him at that point, but it'd be one thing if he'd got there on touchdowns last year, but like 6 rushing touchdowns is a pretty normal number for a lot of these kind of dual threats, anywhere between 4 and 6. Like Kyler Murray had 5 last year, Justin Fields had 6, I think it was. Lamar, you mentioned, had 4. So there just doesn't seem like an obvious regression case for me to make. And I have to believe that Cliff Kingsbury sticking around like Cliff Kingsbury had offers, didn't he? But that's only going to help Jayden Daniels. And hopefully Terry gets out there soon and Zach Ertz can keep defying time and just be good. Because, Jayden Daniels has been fun since the moment he stepped onto the field. And we need more players like him. Well, maybe we've got more. Because at number 3, on the list, as voted for by the Fantasy Sanctuary Discord, which you can get in by hitting the join button down below, Drake Maye comes in. And man, I love Drake Maye. And it's probably become quite fashionable between all of us doing fantasy analysis and people in the best ball streets. But there's a goddamn reason for it. Like he averaged 35 rushing yards per game last year in an absolute miserable Patriots offense, which, as a fan of an AFC team, perhaps perhaps it was okay to see that once, but it's so nice to see grown-ups in the room now with Mike Vrabel there, Josh McDaniels there, and then you've got Stefan Diggs and Kyle Williams, who are such significant upgrades that we've got guys like Jalen Polk, who might not even make the roster now.
So it is one of those things, and you mentioned it, where my biggest hesitation is the fact that everyone is just continuously talking about Drake Maye being this, late round sleeper. But man, I mean, again, 35 rushing yards per game. This dude was a more productive, had more scramble yards than Lamar Jackson last year. Like that actually happened, despite the fact that, again, he wasn't even playing the entire season. So, again, you mentioned the coaching upgrades. We also got some improvements with Stefan Diggs, Kyle Williams. Look, I still wouldn't exactly call this offensive environment this above average or great group or anything, but certainly an improvement over just the dog water group that this dude was surrounded by last year. So, the really fun stat that I did manage to find with Drake Maye is, again, accounting for those 3 games where he came at the end of too early, and then he had that Jets game where he got knocked out quick. So his 10 games with a snap rate of at least 50%, he averaged 220 pass yards and 35 rushing yards per game, man. The only other quarterbacks to do that in the Super Bowl era, Jayden Daniels last year as well, if you account for his missed games, Cam Newton, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Mike Vick, Dante Culpepper, Randall Cunningham, Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, RG3, Donovan McNabb, and Steve Young. There's no busts in there. Usually we have these lists and there's one guy and you're like, well, okay, maybe, I am trending towards a situation where I could be picking the outlier. I made that mistake with the great Chris Herndon, about a half decade ago. So again, sometimes you got to take these with a grain of salt in a smaller sample size. But I just think based on what we've seen from Drake Maye and that rushing ability, plus the ability to be a high-end passer overall, man, just someone where, again, if you are, late on getting to these elite quarterbacks, Drake Maye really, man, stands out in the late rounds as the guy I want.
Yeah, and I was last off season, I kind of deep dived into what traits we see from top 5 and top 12 quarterbacks over the last few years. And consistently, you're talking about throwing for like above 2.2 passing touchdowns per game or hitting 35 rushing yards per game or more. That's what seems to unlock these kind of big weekly finishes, the big ceilings seasonally. And the Patriots last year ran the 7th fewest plays. So if we just get a more competent offense all around, because the wide receivers are better, then it's definitely going to help. And one guy who can definitely help with that is the player who comes in at number 2 on this list, TreVeyon Henderson. Now, look, I've got to say, the Discord, they're drinking the Kool-Aid on the absolute off-season hype. We get a 100-yard punt return touchdown, and then we get TreVeyon Henderson just comes out in the second week and continues to look great. We knew that we knew he'd be explosive, and we knew that he'd be decent catching the ball because he played wide receiver in high school. But like, would you have put TreVeyon Henderson this high if I'd asked you to rank these players, Ian?
Oh man, just in terms of total fun, yeah. Why the heck not? I watched this dude the last 4 years in Columbus, man, just be a complete game breaker every time he touches the ball. Have seen him slow down a little bit as the season goes on. Now that can be the case for plenty of running backs, so I don't want to solely hold it against TreVeyon, but I mean, I do think there was an intentional, just kind of decision by Ohio State last year to bring on Quinshon Judkins actually to divide things up a bit more evenly. Because again, week 1, week 2, TreVeyon was a bit of a different beast than what we saw, down the stretch in November. All that to say, man, like just again, how can you not be impressed by what this dude can do, particularly as a receiver? I know you got it noted here that he did play some wide receiver in high school, but look, Ohio State's one of these teams where they don't need to throw the ball to their running backs all that often. TreVeyon got his, obviously the screen against Texas, but you would see flashes, man, where it's like they were just trying to almost help these guys out, with getting some film out there because like they were playing Purdue or someone beginning of the 4th quarter, and there's TreVeyon out wide running a freaking sluggo double move and taking the top off the defense for 40. Now throughout August, we can't go a day without hearing about TreVeyon catching another wheel route. So it is a situation, and one of the reasons I've been most willing to move him up the ranks, as everyone else kind of is throughout August, is just this really could be that 60, 70 catch running back in an offense that doesn't really have someone else in that mold. Okay, like they want yak opportunities. Josh McDaniels has done this throughout his whole career as a play caller, and look, I like Kyle Williams as much as the next fantasy nerd. He's more of a downfield guy. Stephon Diggs, that's not someone you want to be throwing a bunch of screens to. I guess Pop Douglas can do some of that, but even Hunter Henry, man, like I'm not trying to get Hunter Henry in the open field above all else. So Henderson, again, even if he is going to be giving up, probably half of the rush attempts at least to Ramondre Stevenson, it's just that potential at running back in full PPR to be a game breaker as a receiver that I think is earning the warranted, Devon Achane, Alvin Kamara rookie year vibes. So TreVeyon, man, it sucks that we got to use that late round 3 or round 4 pick to get him these days. But once you start comparing them to, the other guys in that range, like Chuba Hubbard, Breece Hall, James Conner, and those sorts of guys, I think it's fair to move Henderson up, man. So I have him just right behind basically James Cook, Kenneth Walker, O'Marion Hampton, but, deserves to be in that conversation as well.
Yeah, the biggest shame here is just that it's come at the expense of Antonio Gibson, but equally.
God. Free him. You see those numbers last year? The mainstream media won't talk about it, but all those, the Buck Irving numbers everyone freaks out about, Antonio Gibson's were just as good. Trade him to Dallas, please. Come on.
Oh, yeah. Let's make it happen. We can do that. Right. Let's go to the most fun player in fantasy football, according to the Discord, but someone that both me and Ian nominated as well. Travis Hunter. Look, stop with the whole, he's going to play defense. I won't know when to play him. I do not care. This guy is a freaking dog. Go and watch his film. I'm not a certified film watcher by any means, but I can tell when a player is just fun and awesome. Travis Hunter, 2.5 yards per route run, 2.6 yards per team attempt. Like, those are incredible. And the one thing that when people bang on about, well, he might play defense so much, Trevor Lawrence's passing touchdown line over at Underdog Fantasy is set at 22.5. You really think if he's struggling to throw that many touchdowns to be, middling, lower end of the scale, that they're not going to have his best weapons out there? I just can't fathom it. Like, how high are you on Travis Hunter, Ian?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, I think it's a situation where right there around that kind of wide receiver 30 spot where he's going, I just keep finding myself drafting this dude. And I wasn't one of these guys completely, pounding the drum about it throughout the entire offseason. Because, I mean, look, you and me are in these streets basically 365 days a year. He was starting off as like this low end wide receiver too. And that was a little bit tough for me. But just based on everything we've seen in the preseason, honestly, the constant drumbeat we've heard ever since they drafted him, at this point, I am expecting a full-time role on offense, nothing limited, and we'll see what happens there on defense. I almost wish they would just say screw the defensive stuff, because I guess my only worry is kind of what you were talking about with Daniels. This dude holding up. You can say he's an exception. He never gets tired and all that. I mean, when Richard Sherman and Devontae Adams talk about the risks of him being able to hold up, though, I feel like they know a thing or two about what it takes to, last in the NFL. So that's really my only concern, man. So again, it's one of these things where I think there's a lot of good receivers in that range. And, one of my pet peeves when people are just like, why would you not draft Travis Hunter? He's so talented. It's like, yes, he is so talented. Is Jalen Waddle not? Is, George Pickens not? These other guys going in the same range of drafts. So kind of the same thing with the Brock Bowers. I need more than just the fact that these guys are talented. Any freaking top 60 fantasy pick is going to be very talented. But end of the day, I'm with you just in terms of looking at triple digit targets in an offense that should be taking a step forward. And out of everyone here, man, just having gone through in the drafts and clicked on them and, had that feeling, on the scale of just like our 0 to 10 fun, I would say Brian Robinson, even before all this news, was like the 0, which maybe that was a sign that shouldn't have been drafting him in the first place. But 10, the most fun player to draft in fantasy football is Travis Hunter. And that's got to be worth something.
Yeah, if you're not smiling when you draft Travis Hunter, then you're doing fantasy football all wrong. And look, I get the point about defense and all that, but I just think that Travis Hunter, he's going to be involved in those 3 wide receiver sets. The screen game is going to be such a big part of Liam Cohen's plan, like it was in Tampa last year, that he's going to get those easy receptions, which is going to help. And look, Travis Hunter, awful lot of fun. And I just can't believe that the Jags aren't a little bit poor enough that they need to put their top players out there. So, very much in on him. And I think the only kind of argument I find myself putting against him, outside of the one you made about the wide receivers in that range, it's just occasionally roster construction moves me away from him. Like, if I'm looking at Travis Hunter as my wide receiver 2 or even wide receiver 3, I can be a little bit scared off taking him. But if I'm looking at Travis Hunter as my wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5, which is perfectly viable in certain roster constructions, then that's just an absolute easy click for me. Is that kind of how you're approaching him?
Yeah, 100%. Again, if I needed more of a wide receiver too, and I just, you took a quarterback and tight end and a couple running backs
Yeah.
maybe as well early. Maybe that's when I'm going with someone closer to a Calvin Ridley, who I'm also, certainly high on this year. But Hunter, man, look, he
Ooh.
is more of a lottery ticket, but guess what, man? We're trying to win this league. If you got last place punishment, I get it. Maybe not the same sort of first or last mindset, but it is one of these things where, again, you are shooting for the moon. It sure seems like Travis Hunter, is strapped up to a rocket ship right now.
Yeah, I'd just say like nobody anywhere cares about how many times you've made the playoffs in your home league. We just want to know how many times you've won it. Ian, let's go. Like before we get out of here, is there one player you want to make a case for who perhaps wasn't voted into the top 10?
Let me get a look at the list again. I would say Keon Coleman, man, I'm going back and forth with people on Twitter about this guy all day because I had the audacity to talk about, a guy who's going outside the top 120 picks as a potential later round dart. I get it. He was not great as a rookie, everyone. Okay. Not everyone can be Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas Jr. as a rookie. But you know what most 21-year-olds at wide receiver are doing? They're still playing college football. They're not actually being out there and good enough to be on the field in the first place. So I thought we were all in agreement when Keon was drafted that he was a bit more of a raw toolsy project. And I think that's what we saw. But with those raw tools, we did see some talent, man. This dude was number one in the NFL in yards after the catch, above expected per reception. Shout out next gen stats. We also saw the instances, the Jets game, the deep downfield pass against the Lions, where Josh Allen was willing to say, F it, Keon's down there somewhere. I mean, even with the dude missing time and being phased out of the offense, he had 18 targets throwing at least 20 yards downfield last year. I mean, no other Bills player, I think, had more than 11. So, look, Khalil Shakur, very good in his own right. I get it. But if we had to just sit here and say, okay, who's going to lead the Bills in downfield 20-plus yard targets? I think it's Keon Coleman easily. Who's going to lead the Bills in end zone, red zone targets? You could make a case for Kincaid, but you could also make a pretty compelling case for Keon Coleman. So, okay, we have the two most fantasy-friendly targets inside an offense led by the reigning MVP. Should have been Lamar. I'm sorry, but it was Josh Allen. We all love Josh Allen anyway, right? And we're getting him at sub Gabe Davis prices. Like, this dude's going outside the top 50 wide receivers. We don't have to pretend like he's Stephon Diggs. I just think he could be a better version of Gabe Davis out here. So again, once you get to that point in the draft, I understand if you're starting to go to your running backs anyway and everything. But man, Keon Coleman, Rashid Shaheed, your guy Rashad Bateman, Marvin Mims, like there are that group of guys there in that wide receiver 50 to 55 range where that's the last group of guys that I can, again, kind of spell out some semblance of upside for. And I just think that, again, we're so obsessed, and targets per out run are cool and everything. I'm not trying to besmirch those, but man, it's just players are allowed to get better in year two. And it's just interesting to me, the guys that we choose to say can't and will. I mean, Roma Dunze was bad last year by pretty much everything. Sure seems like, this is being held against Keon a lot more than Rome.
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that wide receiver tier. That's something that Pat Raines talked about, like how he feels much more comfortable pushing wide receiver later this year. So that's been playing into my thoughts, and I've been drafting a little bit more Keon Coleman than I had earlier in the offseason.
Yeah.
Mike Leone's been talking him up now. Mike, of course, is a Bills fan, so fine. He maybe can push that off slightly. But Pat Fitzmaurice over at Fantasy Pros is also loving Keon Coleman. And I've learned over the years, occasionally, you just have to be a little bit humble and say, look, if all these smart people are seeing it, then maybe it's worth me sprinkling in a little bit of that player. And the opportunity cost, it's not that much. Even if you were burned by Gabe Davis, even if you were like me, a complete slappy and got burned by Curtis Samuel last year, we don't have to assume that it's always going to be the different. Yeah, it doesn't have to always be the same. But Ian, this has been a lot of fun, rightly so, with the topic. But what have you got going on over at Fantasy Life this week that people should be checking out?
Yeah, man. The Fantasy Life Show, Monday through Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern. Friday, we go a little bit earlier with some guests, but your boys hosting. Always got Dwayne McFarland, Cooter Doodle, Jake Trowbridge, Matthew Friedman, all of our Fantasy Life talent over there joining me. So always a fun time over there. But yeah, fantasylife.com. We actually have a cool sale going on as well. You can use code Ian to get 20% off our tier 1 or tier 2 packages if you're into that kind of thing. Fantasy rankings, utilization tools, all that good stuff. But yeah, man, always great chopping up with you. I love when we get together, man. And just best of luck to everyone in fantasy this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely echo that, and make sure you go and subscribe to the Fantasy Life tools. I use them. They're excellent. Dwayne's utilization report is just unbelievable. But yeah, a lot of fun, man. And we will be back very soon with more great guests. JJ Zacharyson next week. Go and check out this video, though, from Matthew Berry, where we talked about some players that Matthew thinks the ADP is all wrong on.